Using a quote within a paragraph. Prepared for Columbia College English 107. You have been asked to choose a quote from an essay that you will use within a paragraph of your own. By now, you know your topic and have written 3 main points with examples as evidence. Now you are asked to write a 4th body paragraph using a quote as evidence. There are several ways to quote within the body of an essay. For this paragraph, consider using a strong response technique. A strong response could be one of agreement with the quote or of disagreement with the quote, also known as with the grain or against the grain. Remember that your topic sentence and the main idea of the paragraph must support your thesis statement. If you agree with the quote you provide, then it should support your overall thesis statement. If you disagree with the quote you provide, then your argument should still support your thesis statement. To write a strong response in agreement with the quote you have chosen, or with the grain, sandwich the quote in a paragraph by starting with your point and your voice explaining your point. This will likely be several sentences. Then, transition into your quote and provide your quote with the citation. Finally, write several more sentences that explain the significance of the quote and tie it clearly to your point and thesis. To go with the grain of the quote, you might support the idea with your own argument or extend the idea even further. For example, the same quote is used below for expectations of a spouse, first in a with the grain paragraph, and then we'll look at an against the grain paragraph. An expectation that spouses share, no matter their gender, is that the other person in the relationship will help when problems arise. When there are financial concerns or worries about who will pick up which child after school, a spouse expects the partner to help problem solve and find a resolution. According to author John Gray, he wants to help her feel better by solving her problems. He wants to be useful to her. This shows the willingness of one spouse to step in and help another to offer suggestions and work to solve a potential problem. In a partner relationship, there is an expectation that one works with the other to think about solutions. Furthermore, there is an expectation to act upon those decisions once they are made. The first part of the paragraph introduces my idea that supports my paper's thesis. It explains that idea in my own voice. Then the quote, like the meat of the sandwich, is included with a citation. After the quote, I agree with the quote and explain why it is important, what it proves. I push the idea from the quote even further at the end. Notice how much overall space the quote takes up in the paragraph. Notice that it is sandwiched between my own words, my own voice, my ideas, and in this case I use the quote by agreeing with it. The quote only takes up about 1.5 lines or 2 lines of my entire paragraph. Your paragraphs should be written the same way. To go against the grain of a quote, make your argument one that disagrees with your chosen quote, but by disagreeing, you should still be upholding your own thesis. Explain your argument clearly and fully. Then, introduce the quote and include it with the citation. Finally, to go against the grain, you can challenge the reasoning in the quote, an example in the quote, or generate a counterexample. End your paragraph by relating back to your main idea and thesis statement. For example, instead of asking for help or permission at every turn, a spouse expects some degree of autonomy. A wife will sometimes want to make her own decision and solve her own problems without the input of her spouse. Author John Gray points out that a man wants to help her feel better by solving her problems. He wants to be useful to her. Although a spouse may want to help, the truth is that constant tips and suggestions can feel like nagging or worse, controlling the decisions made in the marriage. Adults expect to make decisions and act upon them in life. Taking care of one's own problems, or at least taking steps to rectify them, is an expectation that does not merely disappear upon marriage. The first part of the paragraph introduces my idea that supports my paper's thesis. It explains that idea. Then the quote, like the meat of the sandwich, is included in the middle with a citation. After the quote, I disagree with the quote and explain why. I reiterate my expectation of a spouse further at the end. Notice how much overall space the quote takes up in the paragraph. Notice that it is sandwiched between my own words, my own voice, my ideas, and in this case, I use the quote by disagreeing with it. For this week, you are to read an essay in the book that corresponds to your topic for the exemplification essay. Find one short quote that you can use in your essay to support a main idea. It may be a quote that you agree with and that helps prove your thesis, or it may be a quote that you disagree with and you can use that disagreement to help prove your thesis. For discussion, share the essay you read. Share the quote you have found from within that essay and explain how you plan to use it in your essay. Will you write a paragraph response with the grain or against the grain of this quote? Explain how your plan will support your thesis statement. If you've found several quotes you're interested in, share those with the class and maybe you can get some feedback. That's it. I hope this presentation has helped show how you can integrate a source into your college essay work throughout college, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with this week for our class. Happy writing!